Welcome to handling screening questions like a pro. Before we launch into how I approach screening questions on Upwork, let's talk about just what screening questions are in the first place. As I mentioned in an earlier lesson, screening questions are questions chosen by the client, which get tacked on to your proposal. For example, one popular screening question you'll see is, why do you think you're a good fit for this particular project? And there are many others. Clients can either choose these from a list of pre-written questions, or they can write their own. In either case, anytime you go to submit a proposal and see additional questions that are separate from your cover letter, like the ones you're seeing on the screen right now, those are the screening questions we'll be talking about in this lesson. As their name implies, clients use screening questions to help them narrow down the field of freelancers very quickly. So it's important that you get these right, and I'll show you how to do that shortly. First, here are some key facts you need to know. For one thing, in our research, we found that over 50% of Upwork jobs have one or more screening questions attached to them. And out of all the jobs that do have screening questions, more than half of those will contain pre-written stock questions that the client has chosen from a list of suggestions provided by Upwork. One thing that's important to note is that you have to answer all screening questions. If you don't, your proposal will end up in the client's hidden folder, which is basically the equivalent of a junk folder. Now, as I also mentioned earlier in this module, the client will see your answers to these questions before they ever read your cover letter. What this means to us is that we can't just blindly answer these questions by the book. We need to make sure that each of our answers projects authority. This is the opposite of what most freelancers do. For the most part, they just answer the questions automatically, without thinking. After all, we're trained from the age of 2 to answer questions reflexively. Think of how many thousands of times you've answered on autopilot when someone asked you what your name is. But with screening questions, answering as a reflex is a total disaster because it never results in an answer that captures attention or shows off authority. And hence, it's just a wasted answer that bores clients to tears. I'll give you an example. Let's go back to that popular screening question we talked about a moment ago. Why do you think you're a good fit for this project? Almost every answer you'll see to this question says something along the lines of, it's a good match for my skills, or I have lots of experience, or I'm passionate, etc. But how does this help your proposal? Again, it doesn't capture attention because every one of your competitors is saying the same type of thing. Nor does it demonstrate authority because no one believes your own opinion of yourself. Even if you have 20 years of experience, that doesn't tell the client that you are good at what you do. So the first thing I want you to do is to commit to not answering the screening questions automatically. You need to put a few seconds of thought into it in order to stand out and demonstrate authority. Now, let's ask ourselves how we can do that by approaching that question again from a different perspective. To do that, we really need to read between the lines. Forget about the question itself. What is a high-quality client really asking here? What does he really want to know? Does he really care why we think we're a good fit for his project? Of course not. Like I said a moment ago, no one believes your own estimation of yourself. What high-quality clients really want to know is the same thing they want to know when they post a job without screening questions. They want to know if you are capable of doing their job. That's their number one concern. Human nature doesn't change from proposal to proposal. Now, in case you're wondering why clients would choose screening questions that they don't really want answers to, remember that a lot of the questions are pre-written, so the client just chooses them off a list without putting a lot of thought into it. And many clients feel like they should use screening questions since it's an option offered by Upwork. Finally, a lot of clients just want to see which freelancers stand out, and almost any question will do the trick for that. Because of that, we need to turn the tables and use screening questions to our own advantage. So let's go back to how we can answer the question of why you think you're a good fit for this project in a way that captures attention and demonstrates authority. The key to this is understanding that, as we've already shown, answering literally will usually backfire. Instead, smuggling our persuasive proposal right into our answers is a much more effective approach. So rather than just telling the client how good we are, like everyone else is doing, what if we simply told them about a similar piece of work that we've done and directed them towards an example of that work? So if a job called for a copywriter to write an explainer video for a nutrition app, and the client asked the screening question, "Why do you think you're a good fit for this job?" I could respond by telling them that I'd recently written an explainer video for another nutrition app, and then showing them the script I'd written. Or I could respond with a testimonial, as well as a one-sentence story that explains its relevance to the current client. Do you see how different this would be from the standard approach? Either of these answers would jump right out at the client, showing them that I'm capable of doing their job, rather than just telling. And I'll show you actual examples of this shortly. First, let's take a look at another fairly common screening question that tends to trip up most freelancers. Have you done well on any Upwork tests that you think are relevant to this job? Notice that with this question, for the freelancers answering it by the book, they have two not-so-great options. They can either say no, which is obviously a killer, or they can say, yes, I took such and such test and scored 85%. That's obviously a better answer, but there are still some big problems with it. For one thing, lots of mediocre freelancers do well on tests, so test scores aren't a great way to convey authority. Also, a lot of the jobs you'll apply for won't fit perfectly with any particular test, so there's not necessarily a whole lot of relevance there for the client. And finally, test scores in general just aren't exciting to the client. A test score is just a dry fact, and as we know, clients don't get inspired by facts. We're always going for that emotional reaction from the client. We want to get them excited about the idea of working with us, because that's what moves them to hire us. That's how we get paid well. It's even part of what makes clients become repeat customers. So we need to produce more than just a boring test score. Let's take a look at a great example of how one of my students pulled this off very effectively. Instead of relying on boring facts, notice how she simply uses our persuasive proposal tactics right in her answers to this screening question. She starts off with a testimonial, which is a powerful way to stand out and show authority. Then, she frames a real example of her work, which she's actually pasted into the next question to get the client excited to scroll down and look. She doesn't just say, "Below is a sample of my work." She tells the client why they should care. One thing that's really interesting is that her sample in this case wasn't a direct hit in terms of what the client needed. But notice how, by doing a great job at framing the sample, she actually makes it relevant to them. So this is really exceptional framing in action here. Not surprisingly, she ended up getting hired for this job very quickly and getting paid well for it too. And this is in large part because she didn't answer this screening question reflexively. She took a few moments to think about how to apply persuasive proposal principles instead. Put yourself into the client's shoes. You have 20 freelancers answering this question by saying they scored 90% on some writing test. And along comes this freelancer with a testimonial and a story about a client she'd done email copywriting for, as well as a nicely framed real example of her work that the client can easily see right below it. Is it any surprise this proposal was successful? Now, I want to quickly caution you, as I did in the previous lesson, to not get hung up on the individual tactics you're seeing. For instance, if Radhika hadn't used a testimonial here, she still would have done a great job of using her sample to demonstrate authority. And in fact, that's exactly what she did when she first started out and had no testimonials to use. So you do not need testimonials to pull this off by any means. In fact, I very rarely use them in my own proposals. Testimonials are just one way to show authority, and if you're just starting out, then it's totally fine to rely more heavily on your samples. At the same time, getting testimonials is much easier than most people think. You can always get some from people you know, like coworkers, an old boss, or even friends and acquaintances in exchange for work you do for them. So it isn't difficult to get a testimonial or two pretty quickly if you want them. But remember, these are not in any way, shape, or form required, especially if you're just starting out. Okay, now the process I've just outlined and demonstrated for you can be applied to just about any screening question. You'll encounter all sorts of these, and different combinations of them too, so each situation will be different. But the good news is that by thinking about the questions in the right way, and taking an extra minute or two to think about how to use the question to your advantage in order to demonstrate authority, you can separate yourself from the pack and show the client you're capable of doing their job, even if you happen to be a brand new freelancer. For example, in Radhika's proposal, which we just looked at, there was a final screening question that asked freelancers if they knew how to write an email drip campaign. There's no doubt that most of her competitors just answered yes. But Radhika went above and beyond, directing the client back to the sample she'd pasted into the previous question box, which was a much more powerful demonstration. As I said in the last lesson, I want you to think of your proposal like a train on a track. Instead of stopping the train in its tracks by simply repeating herself, Radhika chose to move the train forward by remembering that her job is to prove she can do the client's work, not mindlessly answer questions like a robot. One final note. Please understand that I am not suggesting that you never answer screening questions in a straightforward manner. That is not the case at all. For example, if a client asks if you have questions about their project, that is a great opportunity to go ahead and ask a question or two that shows them you're thinking about their work and that you're someone who cares about getting the job done right. The same goes for a screening question that asks if you have any suggestion to help the project go smoothly. This is another chance for you to shine by helping the client, showing that you're likable, and demonstrating your intelligence by coming up with a thoughtful suggestion. So feel free to answer screening questions directly, as long as doing so can help you stand out, show authority, and be likable. But if giving a by-the-book answer will only derail you by wasting the client's time and not showing them anything useful, then you need to think outside the box. That's how winners win. They don't do it by jumping on the bandwagon and doing the same thing everyone else is doing. They do it by thinking differently about problems and coming up with creative solutions to solve them. Thank you for watching. See you in the next lesson.